بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Dear brothers and sisters, today inshallah I hope to talk to you a little bit about science of meditation, mindfulness, and how this links in with dhikr. There's been a lot obviously in scientific press and mainstream media as well about the benefits of mindfulness, but what does this really look like, and how do we incorporate it in terms of our own Islamic spiritual practice? Is it a Buddhist phenomenon? Is it something new? Is it something old? Inshallah, I hope to give you some nuggets to take away so that you can apply this in a practical way. Just going to share my screen. So what is mindfulness? Mindfulness, according to the Oxford Dictionary, is a quality or state of being conscious or aware of something. So if you're mindful of something, means that you've thought about it or you're aware of it. Mindfulness in the current context means a mental state achieved by focusing one's awareness on the present moment while calmly acknowledging and accepting one's feelings, thoughts, and bodily sensations. And this can be used in a therapeutic way. So recognizing where we are and how we feel at that moment in time is what's being referred to here. So perhaps a combination of both of these things, but in a current of parlance, it is the therapeutic application of mindfulness. So here's a question to ask yourself. Are you living or are you simply existing? So by this, are you in a mindless frenzy of doing and busyness without feeling the fresh air on your face, the smell of the flowers, the sensation of paper in your hands, the feelings, the emotional feelings that we get from being with another person? Or are you just on this spree of business and existence, passing your life away? What is Islamic mindfulness? So this is a particularly buzzed concept at the moment. From my perspective, my understanding, which is very limited, it is really basically, it can be explained threefold. So first is fasting. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says is to attain taqwa. What is taqwa? Taqwa is basically a state of God consciousness in which we intentionally follow the obligations and abstain from the prohibited. Of course, there are many, many definitions of taqwa, but to be able to achieve it, you have to be aware of yourself and aware of God and aware of his limits and prohibitions and his commands. And inshallah, this is a month where we will all attain taqwa. Then the other aspect is muraqabah, from raqabah, to watch over. So this is where we take ourselves to account and we watch over ourselves, we watch over our thoughts, our feelings, our ideas. And as they say, your thoughts become your thoughts become who you are. It's what we think, what we believe, what we imagine, that takes over how we behave. And, spiritually, we know that what is happening in our hearts is manifested through the tongue and through the limbs. So Ramadan is also a month of muraqabah, where we watch over ourselves. We're extra careful because, in fact, we could, of course, pretend to fast and go and eat secretly. But what we realize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-Raqib, he's watching over us, and we become acutely aware of this. And that's why the reward of fasting, well, that's one of the reasons why the reward of fasting is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. It's not necessarily a public act of worship, in the sense that it's unless you were to tell someone, they wouldn't know that you were fasting. And the third aspect that I wanted to address was that of ghafla. So ghafla meaning heedlessness. This is the opposite of being in a state of dhikr, being in a state of remembrance for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because of course the whole purpose of Islamic mindfulness is to take us from being aware of our own actions, our own state of heart, to being aware of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Imam Kushairi rahimahullah explained that just as the one who's intoxicated with wine is prohibited from salah. So he cannot pray. You can't pray under the influence of alcohol. Person who's intoxicated with the intoxication of heedlessness, i.e. is consumed by the dunya, so is so consumed by the dunya that he is not able to think, process, and that person is prevented from an intimate connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's cutting off our mindfulness and our connection. So the mindfulness practice that we talked about, which is a state of being aware of what's around you, how does this benefit us? So these are some of the benefits. Of course, there are many, many more, and there's a lot of ongoing research, but it's been shown to improve mental health by reducing anxiety and helping to treat depression. I remember going into the barber shop with the children once, and there was a sign up there saying that, you know, that yesterday is the past, but today is a present, and it is the present. So it's a gift. So about being present right now. And we know that people that are often depressed are mentally stuck in the past, and people that are very future focused are often carry high levels of anxiety. So it's about coming back into this center zone. It reduces cognitive bias. So in a study of lawyers, it showed that they were less likely to give in to racial and financial prejudices if they practiced mindfulness. It can help improve your self-compassion, so compassion towards yourself, how you treat yourself, your self-worth, and your body image. It also works on areas of the brain associated with cognition, memory, so the hippocampus. And in fact, there are structural changes in the brain. It's also associated with improved attention, concentration, reaction times. So that means less sort of parallel thinking. So you're thinking of one thing and doing something else at the same time, or perhaps sometimes we even have 2 or 3 circuits of thoughts all at the same time, or we keep getting distracted, or we're not able to focus or finish. And this particularly affects us in our salah, where the mind goes off roaming. But in fact, we can train our mind through mindfulness practice to improve our concentration within our salah. It can also help with a number of physical ailments, including chronic pain and possibly many chronic diseases. That research is currently ongoing, so I don't really want to list particular conditions where it might be beneficial. Needless to say that it's probably helpful in all chronic conditions, because most of them are associated with being in a state of chronic pain or chronic discomfort, and with a lot of health anxiety and actually hardship. So what do mindfulness practices look like? Well, there's a whole spectrum of them. From a spiritual perspective, it would be simple things like dhikr, you know, that dhikr that we sit down with our prayer beads and do, but also the dhikr that we make when we go out. We smell the flowers, we breathe in the fresh air, we thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the sunshine, we appreciate all his favors. So the dhikr of the heart, the dhikr of the tongue, you know, the dhikr of the limbs, the dhikr of every part of our being is a mindfulness practice, because it connects us back with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Salah, of course, is an absolute pinnacle of mindfulness. If it's done correctly, it's about bringing ourselves into the conscious presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There are meditation practices, open practices where you notice everything around you, and closed practices where you focus on things like breathing. We could talk about this in a little bit more in a minute. We've got breathing exercises. Many people have heard of square breathing or 2, 3, 4 breathing. There are many, many different types of breathing. The one that I tend to recommend is 4-8 or 4-10, where you breathe in for 4 and breathe out for 10, or breathing through your alternate nostrils. Or breathing, holding and breathing out. There are many, many ways of doing this that can be explored at another time. Mindful eating, which is basically when, you know, the sunnah way of eating, we actually sit down, we're not grazing, we're aware of what we're eating, we're giving thanks at the beginning and the end. There's a process around it, and we chew our food properly, as the Prophet says, and taught us not to put another morsel in our mouths until we finish the previous one. So mindful eating. Spending time outdoors in nature, that connects us back, I believe, with our fitra. with the connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rather with concrete buildings and technology, which we believe are all man-made. Avoiding multitasking, so actually you become much less efficient and your brain is much more likely to hop if you are trying to do more than one thing at once. And it's not that women are better at it than men, it's just that we tend to do more of it, perhaps because of the demands of our time. Creative hobbies that involve working your hands, for example, crafts, cookery, woodwork, all those things, gardening, they're all fantastic. They take the mind off its thinking processes and puts you into a state of mindfulness. And physical activities such as swimming, but of course we remember the sunnah sports, archery, horse riding, running and swimming. And it's interesting that Prophet ﷺ said, as noted in Bayhaqi, that any act devoid of the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is void, except for shooting, training a horse, playing with one's family and swimming. So this is a fascinating hadith because it just actually tells us that when we're doing these activities, we are likely to be in a state of switching off our active thinking, processing mind and being engaged in a different part of the brain, where we are essentially doing a mindfulness practice, and we're not accountable for that because it's of benefit to us. Running has particular benefits. Not only is it associated with reduced mortality, but it produces chemicals similar to cannabis, weed, the healthy stuff, endocannabinoids, which are deeply relaxing. You also form new blood vessels and new nerve cells in the brain. You may produce endorphins, which are the pleasure hormones, but that's not necessarily always the case. But interestingly, it blunts the brain's response to physical and emotional stress and improves memory and restructuring the brain. So this is a simple technique. I often use this with patients with chronic pain, but it can be used for almost anything. It's the stop technique. So the first point, the S is for stop. So whatever you're doing, stop and notice the present moment, or stop and notice whatever you wish to notice. Take 3 slow, deep and mindful breaths and observe it. And you might want to label 3 sounds around you, what you hear, what you touch, what you see, and then proceed whatever you need to do mindfully. And there are many adaptations of this, but it's important that you can use this technique whenever you need to, just to stop and gather yourself together, just by noticing what you need to notice in the environment around you, using your senses. And one of my teachers used to say, come from your mind to your senses, because that will bring you back into the present. Often the quality of time that we spend with ourselves is not good. It's rumination, it's recurrent thoughts, and it drives mental illness, rather than being present with ourselves and with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his creation. So I just want to show this slide. SubhanAllah, I think this is amazing. Every time we learn this stuff, it reminds us more and more of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his majesty, and the way that he has created such a fine design in everything. So meditation is one of the means to mindfulness. It's a practice, as we've discussed on the mindfulness list earlier. It's like the low power mode. So people often assume sleep is the low power mode. Sleep is not our human low power mode. If you had a mobile phone and you kept it constantly on charge and going, it would never reset. But there are times when you need a screensaver, and meditation is like a screensaver for us. It reduces various different types of brainwave activity. Sleep is actually a very active state where we are getting rid of dysfunctional genes and those that are associated with cancer and cell death and various things. It's like a complete detox process, which is why we need to have enough sleep. It's actually a very, very active process, whereas meditation is actually our recovery process. If you do it regularly, it's associated with improved compassion, memory, attentiveness, and reduced stress. It reduces cognitive decline, so things like Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's, all these things can be staved off by improving sort of not just our mental, but our brain health. And the amazing thing is, subhanAllah, that just like stress is epigenetic in the sense that it's transmitted through generations, Meditation also has epigenetic effects. It alters gene expression actually pretty quickly. It turns off pro-inflammatory genes, so genes that cause inflammation in the body, and it modulates the activity of an enzyme called telomerase, which controls the length of our chromosomes. So, you know, the shorter chromosomes, that's associated with shorter lifespan and increased ill health, but actually it seems to downregulate telomerase activity. And these effects are naturally passed on through to your offspring. And also, subhanAllah, as brain growth, so it protects grey matter. So in this slide, you can see that this is a controlled person. So this is somebody who's not practicing meditation. This is what's happening in the brain of a meditator. So you can see that some of this brain activity is reduced, not completely, but it's significantly less. You've got fewer parts of the brain that are active all at the same time. And this is what's happening during meditation. So during meditation, you can see that all these processes are slowed down considerably compared with the control. So how do we link our mindfulness meditation with our dhikr process? How many of us find that we sit down with our prayer beads and we stand in prayer and, you know, the words are on the tongue but not in the heart, and we keep trying or we keep drifting off? And, you know, and then we end up beating ourselves up about it, or we end up thinking, well, I might as well not do it because I'm not good enough, or I just can't do it, or I'm so disconnected with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we end up having a bad opinion either of ourselves or of Allah. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knew that we would have these challenges, and He's created within us the ability to retrain our minds. So obviously the first thing is always the environment. So set the intention, make sure you have a habit, make sure you have a space to do your dhikr, make sure you have a process. But the intention is the key. As Ibn Atta'illah said, that actions are like lifeless souls, lifeless forms, the soul of which is in the intention. And what you would do is you would start your dhikr and use it as an anchor. So every time your mind drifts off, you bring it back to the act of the dhikr. And you would not want to spend your mind reflecting too much on the dhikr. That's a different process. That's tafakkur, that's and tadabbur, which is reflection. But here it's the concept of training your mind to be present with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and just getting in the habit of training your mind to not wander so much. And inshallah, once you've got that tafakkur, and many other things will become a lot easier. But the first step is to try and get the brain to stop hopping so much. So use a dhikr as the anchor. Treat yourself with compassion, which means that if the mind wanders off, recognize that that's its job. It's meant to be scanning the world and scanning your mental space to make sure that you're safe. And that's why it wanders off. And you can just rein it in. The more security it feels, inshallah, the easier it will become for you. As I mentioned before, you've got the process of dhikr and versus rumination. A lot of us spend our minds ruminating, thinking the same thoughts over and over again, overthinking. But actually, if we use dhikr as the anchor, so when our minds start to ruminate, we bring them back to the dhikr that we've chosen, whether it's alhamdulillah, subhanallah, whatever it might be that your anchor is, and that inshallah will help to break that cycle. And you know, as I said earlier, what is the quality of the time we spend with ourselves? I think inshallah, if you take away one thing from this brief talk, that would be the question to answer. Do we spend any time with ourselves? Is the time that we spend with ourselves of any quality? Are we able to sit alone? Are we able to sit alone and reflect? As it's been said, I don't believe this is a hadith, that a year of reflection is better than 80 years of worship. But how many of us are able to sit there without our phones pinging and be present? And following on, if we cannot spend quality time with ourselves, knowing ourselves, understanding our thoughts and processes, and just being present, what is the quality of the time that we spend with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Because to know Him, we have to know ourselves. The key, as I said, is consistency and habit formation. And the last thing I wanted to leave with is the mindful practice of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's name. We say Allah. Actually, the old part is very contracted, but the ilah part is from very deep inside our lungs. And it's extended, it's stretched. Allah. And in fact, it's almost like a breathing exercise. Of course, mention of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's name is far greater than a breathing exercise. But it's incredible that when we remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's name, we're saying it from the depths of our heart. And with that, it is bringing down our heart rate and slowing down our breathing, and bringing us into the present. Inshallah, I hope those tips were helpful. Jazakumullah khairan. Let me just come out of this. Inshallah, I hope, inshallah, Jazakumullah khairan, and please keep us in your du'as. Sani Gratullah.